At some point in our lives, many of us give our power away quietly, not with words, but with compliance, silence, adaptation. Today is an invitation to notice the vows we never meant to take and to gently remember the voice that has always been guiding us. Welcome to I Awaken, a space for remembering who you are beneath conditioning, expectation, and habit. I am Yusuf, and today I'm honored to be joined by Toni LaMotta, spiritual coach, master teacher, internationally acclaimed speaker, and expert in facilitating deep personal transformation. After living 16 years under a formal vow of obedience in a convent, Tony discovered something profoundly universal, that many of us live under invisible vows that slowly disconnect us from our inner authority. Today, we are exploring what it means to reclaim your inner compass and live from self trust instead of permission. With that, I welcome Dr. Tony Lamora to the show.
Thank you very much, Yusuf. Glad to be here.
Perfect. Tony, before we explore the idea of vows more broadly, I am curious, when did you first sense that obedience was costing you your own voice?
When did I first? Well, I think while I was in the convent, there were many times that I was, caught up. Like, for example, there was something called grand silence at night. At a certain time at night, you were not to look at anyone, speak to anyone. And I remember somebody was in trouble and they were crying. And, the compassion in me went over and spoke with them and talked to them
Mm,
and broke that rule because I knew something deeper was calling. And I had lots of little instances like that made me realize I was, quote, breaking the law, breaking the rule, and yet I was following something deeper. But mostly, I really silenced that voice, and it wasn't until after I left the convent that I began to study and read all kinds of spiritual literature, and I wound up taking many courses that really taught me how to listen, and I realized how much I had shut off. So, it wasn't actually just one instance that let me realize it, but it's like during the time I knew something was off, but I just continued because I thought that was the holy way, follow the rule, listen to what you're being taught. And and so it was not until later that I really found methodologies that taught me.
mm,
And now that's what I teach to everyone else.
mm. And many people believe that vows only belong to religion or formal commitment. What do you think most of us misunderstand about the vows we unconsciously took?
Oh, exactly. You don't have to have been in a convent to have taken a vow. Um, worked with many people over the last few decades and realized, many people take a vow to their family's expectation. It's like what was expected, what your parents expected, what you and and sometimes it's to our religion and to the things that we've been told by someone else, even when we don't quite agree, or later on when you have a job to your company's culture. It's or very often in a relationship. I know many women whose voice got smaller when they got into a relationship, and, it can happen to men as well, but
Mm,
it's to some version of ourself that somebody else thinks that we should be living, and I don't know if you know the Enneagram, is something that I teach, which is a whole spiritual tool to help awaken us, and every one of us came into life with the knowing of everything we needed. But then
Mm.
something happened to us in childhood, and each of us make a decision to turn away from that. And that's how our ego develops. And like to think that the development of our ego are the kinds of vows that we take, and they're different for all the different types of people. But it's primarily people in relationship, especially to families or to even what society is saying is right, even when you know it's not.
Mhm. I'm curious, where do these unconscious vows usually begin? Is it childhood, culture, survival, or something even deeper?
Well, I think it is really our ego formation, as I began to say there. It's every single person develops a personality based on some kind of wounding. And it doesn't have to be major trauma. I mean, there are some people who grow up thinking, they're never good enough, that there's a perfect way to be. There's some people who grow up thinking my needs are important, everybody else's needs are, and they take care of everyone else before they take care of themselves. There are some people who grow up saying, I got to be a success and look like the part that I've been told to play rather than what I think might be true. There are some people who think, if I learn more, if I just become really good so there are just many different facets, different ways that people grow up. There are some people who grow up and one of the major people that I work with are what they call Enneagram sixes. They grow up believing that they can't trust themselves, that
Mm.
somebody else's voice is so much stronger and more powerful, and so they spend their whole lives looking for someone to trust and at the same time concerned that they can't trust anyone. It's a challenge.
Mm. What tends to happen internally when we repeatedly override our inner need?
Well, I think that our spirit dies, basically. The person that we're meant to be, the essence of us, is
Yeah.
becomes shut down, and
Mm.
we become a kind of a robot. Uh, and unfortunately, many people live this way. They don't even take the time to question, wait a minute, is this what I really want? Or am I just living out someone else's thoughts and someone else's dreams? And do I know what the right thing to do is for me, not necessarily what someone else thinks is right?
Mm.
When we shut down, it becomes a robotic life is what I would describe, and one that doesn't give the joy that you're meant to, and doesn't give you the opportunity to become everything that you're meant to be here.
Mm. When someone begins to sense like they have been living under a vow that no longer serves them, where does reclamation actually begin?
Well, I think it begins slowly, number 1, and it can begin in a lot of different ways. I think for many people, they rebel and then go kind of a little bit crazy with it, but I think it begins by learning to pay attention to your body and learning to pay attention to energy. And so when we stop and this very simple practice of learning to breathe and say, what are the sensations happening in my body? We all know when something is not quote right for us
Yeah.
because we get a headache, we get a stomach ache, we get a pain in our shoulder, but we ignore them or we take an aspirin to try to hide them. And I think that teaching people the very first thing that I would teach people is how to listen to what your body is saying. And I call it coming to presence. When we become aware of ourselves, our physical being, our heart opens up And then our mind gets clear and we can see the truth rather than the noise that's been chattering at us. So it all starts with the breath and sensation.
Mhm. When people start living from inner authority, guilt or fear often shows up. What tends to happen at that stage?
When the fear shows up, well, I think my experience in my own life and in the life of my clients is that the fear doesn't go away, but you learn the difference between the voice of your inner knowing and the voice of fear. There's an old story that says, the child went to a grandfather and says, I've got two voices. Which one do I listen to? And the grandfather says, the one that you feed. And
Mm.
so what I invite people very early on when I'm working with them is to start to see, you can even name the different voices. I studied with a woman named Sonia Choquette, and she delightfully says, name your spirit and name your barking dog, she calls it. And it's just kind of a fun exercise. But when you do that, you start to become aware of those two voices. And the voice that's fear usually comes with bodily sensations that are uncomfortable. And the voice of no one comes with a deep sense of relaxation and peace. And so it takes time. If you've shut that down, it takes time to start listening. But once you do, it becomes extremely clear. And what happens when that fear voice speaks up, you can kind of laugh at it and say, thanks very much for sharing. I'm gonna listen to my inner voice, not to you.
Yeah.
Mm. I hope that helps. Mhm.
Yeah, that helps indeed. And how do these vows show up in everyday life, in careers, relationships, or even spiritual spaces?
Well, I think, I'm thinking of one of my clients named Jerry, for example, that he came and he said he couldn't make a decision. And
Mm.
so he was paralyzed in everything. Should he take the promotion? Should he stay in his marriage? Should he move across the country? He had pros and cons lists all the time. He was
Mm.
asking everybody's opinion. He was doing research, trying to find out, and still felt kind of stuck. And and that's when I said to him, "Let's get in touch with what your body is saying." And he looked at me initially as if I had asked him to speak in a foreign language, but then we started practicing some of the techniques, and he learned to get quiet and listen between the noise. And what he heard was his body telling him. When he thought about his promotion, for example, his body would get tense and he knew that was not the right thing. Or when he thought about staying in his marriage, he felt this incredible tightness. But when he thought about moving, suddenly he had this sense of peace and calm. And so he began to learn to make decisions based on his body speaking to him and his own inner knowing. And, I've done that hundreds of times in my life when I'm trying to make a decision on something, I simply stop and say, "How do I feel about it?" And it sounds oversimplistic, but
Mm.
in more you listen to that voice, the easier it gets.
Yeah. What are some quiet signs that someone's inner compass has gone offline?
Okay. One of them is constant anxiety.
Mm.
That's what I'm saying is mostly people have what they call a low grade anxiety, and they have a sense of I can't trust. I can't trust you. I can't trust authority. I can't trust myself. Very often, those are the main signs. And indecision, what many people call procrastination, is
Mhm.
really happening because someone can't make a decision. They're afraid of listening to their own voice. So those are the common telltale signs. It's self-doubt, you know, overthinking, questioning themselves over and over again. Is this the right decision? Should I do this? Did I do it wrong? Successful people make very quick decisions, and usually that's the mark of a good success. Success is someone who, and when you make a decision and it turns out to be not the perfect thing, it's easy to turn it around and make another decision. But when someone is so afraid, they get stuck. And so I guess stuckness is another way I would describe it. It's indecision, self-doubt, anxiety. Those are the telltale signs.
Okay. For listeners who feel stirred by this conversation and want to explore your work further, where can they find you?
Well, probably the best place to go would be my website, and that is simply ToniLaMotta.com. It's ToniLamotta.com. And actually, if you go there, there is an opportunity to sign up for my newsletter. And what I send people is a quiz to test how good is your inner compass. And then
Mm.
from there, invite people, uh, invite people to have a discussion with me. And you can always write to me directly at drtony@tonylamotta.com. That's just GRTONI. And we can set up an appointment and I can help figure out what's the next best step for each person.
Perfect. And to all our listeners, the links to the website and addresses are in the show's notes. Dr. Tony, is there any last message that you want to leave us with?
And it's just that it's a process. And one of the things that I like to tell people is make it fun. Try not to get so serious that, oh my gosh, I don't know how to do this. But
Mm.
it's like when someone walks in the room, see if you can sense their energy. When you have a pet, see if you can define what their energy is like and just kind of play with it for a while and then stop. And I find one of my clients said she keeps a journal now whenever she does hear that inner voice. And she said the pages are getting full when she thought she wasn't hearing it, and it become fun. She uses pictures and, she's an artist. She likes to draw things, and so make it fun is the best thing, and take it slow. It happens. It doesn't happen overnight. It certainly didn't for me, but I am so glad that I followed this process.
Thank you so much for being here with us on I Awaken.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
And to our listeners, if something within you stirred today, trust that awakening because it is rarely loud, it is always honest. Until next time, stay present and stay true.